I think though, generally speaking, like people equate change with loss in general, right? And so when you're working with people who don't necessarily have growth mindset, um, they can still view any change in AI in particular because a lot of people go to like the dystopian conclusion, right? It can still be perceived as a threat.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. I'm Mark Verbenkoff, and this is episode number 179. As might be a bit evident, this pre-intro is a little different than usual in that this is actually an AI avatar of Mark speaking. Over the next few episodes, we'll be experimenting with a few avatars and the AI voice cloning tech that is available to craft these pre-intros for all future podcasts. We talk about AI on the podcast all the time, so we thought we might as well use it instead of just talking about it. But don't worry, the interviews themselves will be only human-based discussions. Moving to today's episode, we are most relevantly talking about the increasing adoption of artificial intelligence in organizations. My guest and I talk about the challenges of implementing AI technologies, the potential applications of AI in various industries, and the importance of aligning business strategy with data strategy for effective AI implementation. We also discuss the potential for AI-driven advertising, of using generative AI tools to simplify HR policy amongst other things. My guest to talk about all of this today is Zain Shah. He is a visionary leader with over 18 years of experience in data strategy, analytics, and AI, specializing in driving business transformation and growth. As CEO and co-founder of Zain, he empowers companies through cutting-edge data solutions. His accomplishments include modernizing data platforms for a $5 billion global company, achieving $2 million in annual savings, and scaling a $2 million auto startup into a $70 million business with a 143% CAGR. Zain Abedin's expertise spans M and AMP, A integrations, digital transformation, and fostering data-driven cultures, offering valuable insights at the intersection of technology and business leadership.
Hi there, Zain. Thank you very much for coming onto the podcast today to talk about, well, something that's been, coming up on the podcast quite a bit, artificial intelligence and how organizations are adopting it, strategizing about it, how it's transforming their work. It's a pretty fascinating field, especially over the last couple of years as the, general population has kind of woken up to, well, the fact that AI is here and it's not really going away anytime soon. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. The way that I like to start the podcast is, a little bit more of a personal question about, how you got involved in the work that you're doing now. So, I mean, maybe I can just ask you simply that, and you can kind of bring us along the most likely interesting journey that you're on.
Sure. So, short version, I love data, I love people, and I love innovation. So this kind of brings, my three passions together, AI in particular. Most of my experience has been working with traditional, either for or with traditional organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to interject growth mindset into more traditional fixed mindset type structures. And given that I have an experience and love for data, AI seemed like the perfect pathway to sort of implement some of these, innovations.
Right. Well, I mean, maybe we can start off with that, this kind of, hesitancy to adopt new tech or this resistance to change. I mean, we could honestly spend probably the whole podcast just on this one point, but like, has there been, how should I say this, a change in the type of resistance that you've been seeing over the course of your career? Like, have businesses and the individuals in those, or are they still having the same kind of resistances that they did, 5, 10 years ago, or is it different now with AI?
Uh, so I would say it depends obviously on the organization or the leadership structure you're talking with. With AI, I would say the resistance is less than previous, right? Because I would say what I've been encountering is like trying to tempers people's expectations around, hey, AI, how AI applications are going to change the world for them, right? Everybody's so excited, and the generative AI applications, which have become so commonplace in the last 2 years, I think have really gotten a lot of people's minds wrapped around this idea that, oh, AI is so simple to consume. I can build my own AI application, or I can come up with a use case for my organization to launch some kind of AI product.
Mhm.
So I would say in that sense, it's decreased. Um, I think though, generally speaking, like people equate change with loss in general, right? And so when you're working with people who don't necessarily have growth mindset, um, they can still view any change in AI in particular because a lot of people go to like the dystopian conclusion, right? It can still be perceived as a threat. But generally, I would say, yeah, people seem to be more receptive to this as a change because it doesn't seem to be perceived as like a short-term fad, right? It seems to be actually like a long-term transformative trend that's going to sort of impact everybody globally.
Mhm.
And so that's creating, I think, a more welcoming reception.
Well, interesting. Yeah, you know, in a previous life, I worked in Barcelona, and I was working in these large European projects trying to bring organizations together. And one of the projects was about helping businesses adopt collaborative robots, manufacturing, food industry, and a couple other different sectors. And there was like substantial pushback from the employees about adopting these robots because they all thought robot equates to it taking over my job and therefore I'm out. And yet the whole point of a collaborative robot is in the name. It collaborates with the person that's working there. It's just a tool to help you do your work maybe a little bit more efficiently, more safely, all these sorts of things. Um, so it's, I guess the follow-up question for you is, are you speaking mostly to the executive teams on these organizations as kind of the first point of contact, and is it kind of like a top-down push to adopt AI and generative AI technologies, or are you also hearing like a bottom-up approach where entire teams are saying, "Hey, CEO, like we need to start using AI right now"?
Great question. I would say both.
Hmm.
Um, the CEO, like the C-level discussion, I think I would say it's more like ego driven,
Mm.
rather than maybe out of necessity for like we need a use case to create value. So, my friend Mark is the CEO of Future Tech Co. And we play golf, and you told me about this amazing innovation that you're doing. So now I go back to my team and say, hey, Mark's company's doing this. Why don't we do that?
Mm.
Versus I think, kind of like the grassroots bottom up approach is more like practical use case application, right? And seeing like, yep, we're doing this very manual, mundane, rote task that could be automated based on the resources and tools we have available, but it may not necessarily be a priority at the organizational level. And so that's the role we try to fill, right? Is to try to align business strategy and business priority with data strategy and then subsequently with AI strategy and AI application development.
Right, right. And for some of these like let's call it the grassroots movements, if you will, within these organizations, when they get their way, is there a shift in the kind of tasks that they're doing? Like I would assume that they're saving, anywhere between, 5 and 25 or 30% and up of the work that they're doing. Do they take on like different projects, or is it well, I can relax a little bit? Like what's the mindset if we want to talk about the hierarchy of the pyramidal hierarchy of an organization, the lower rungs of an organization.
Yeah. So in my last role, this very thing happened when
Mm.
we rolled out some new tech, and some of the more hands-on keyboard type folks were concerned because they're like, well, AI can do our jobs just as effectively as we can. And in fact, it was embedded in the tools we were using, right?
Mm.
And so what we tried to, myself and my managers to whom they reported directly, right, who rolled up to me, what we tried to explain to them was, firstly, we're not ready for that quite yet, right? You need a very sort of usable data structure, and you need to understand what that data is telling you in order to leverage the AI in a very constructive way. Number two, it's actually a value add for you and for the organization if we can let the automation happen for kind of the day-to-day tasks, and you can spend more time interacting one-on-one with leaders in the business. That's kind of what your value really should be, because this thing is not replaceable, certainly not imminently replaceable. And having gone through that discussion, it goes from fear to relief, right? It's like, okay, back to your point around like what I call collective intelligence. The machines and the humans are collaborating together to deliver a more comprehensive experience for the stakeholders. I think that's the goal, but it often requires like, you have to sit down and engage with people one-on-one to explain that, to sort of allay the fear and highlight what the value would be of slightly changing the work you're doing today.
Interesting. So it's really a laborious process to get some of these organizations changing from that fear mindset to the relief or the adoption mindset, or is there like a simple 5-minute discussion that can change somebody's mind in your experience?
So, I mean, in change management in general, I would say it helps to have, champions at all levels of the organization,
Yeah.
right? So someone at the C-suite, maybe senior executives or middle managers, and then folks down at the ground level. And if it's cross-functional, it's even better because now they're creating a groundswell of enthusiasm throughout the organization. Um, but sort of developing a communication plan with a cross-functional team. Also, I would say it helps to have external champions as well, right? Companies who have seen these use cases develop successfully outside of your organization to say, yep, we understand your concerns. We've seen them. It's not unique to your organization. Other organizations in your industry or different industries have overcome the same challenges. They've had the same fears. This is how we can address them, right? But I wouldn't say it's like a magic wand and people are just like mesmerized by the solution,
Yeah,
right? It's
sure.
it's like any other change, right? It requires understanding, kind of where the fear is coming from and then coming up with practical solutions. And then once those solutions are implemented, like usually in a pilot, to start creating credibility within the organization. So, okay, these guys actually know what they're talking about. They developed a product or they developed an application. It's working functionally. We're learning from this. Now let's give them additional resources to continue down the journey.
Right. Okay. That makes perfect sense. Um, should we maybe make this a little bit more tangible for the audience? So you mentioned, CEOs, at a golf course or something like that, talking about the new AI tool that they're implementing, and they get excited about that. Could you, I mean, obviously, without giving too many details, but what are some of the use cases that you're seeing? Like, is there a maybe a better question is there a trend of use cases that you're seeing more than others, or is it just kind of one-off cases for the different businesses that you know, have a bespoke thing that they need implemented or automated?
Yeah, in general, I would say so this is considering a sales organization, um, an operational, like a call center operations, a warehousing company, and then a medical practice.
Mm,
The common thread across the four of them has been automation of routine tasks, right? That's where a lot of folks, I think, can see like really tangible value.
mhm.
And so, one of our clients now, they're a medical company, and I won't get too much into the industry, right? It's
Yeah,
kind of out
yeah,
from
yeah,
here.
yeah.
But, there are tools available in the market now which can assist them with diagnosis, right?
Mm,
Where so you have an X-ray or a radiograph from the patient. There are tools which have vast databases of radiographs, and because there is so much variance in what the human eye is not able to detect in an X-ray, right? Once you have the pictures tagged with metadata, you can get really into a very discrete level of analysis and diagnosis. So now you brush up the patient's X-ray against this database, and now again working together with the clinician, you can give a much more concrete, and I love the word tangible, right? Description to the patient because like I'm not a technical person from a medical perspective. So if a doctor is talking to me, I'm going to trust them more than likely in whatever they say and whatever they described in the picture, right? Keep in mind these pictures have like up to 256,000 shades of gray, right? So I'm going to trust what they say. But now if you add a tool which is AI driven and it's highlighting spots using color coding, right? that makes it easier for me as a layperson to digest and understand. And I think that's the sort of value that businesses are trying to extract from AI tools, at least with the companies we're working with.
Right, right. And maybe a point of clarification here. We're not really talking about generative AI applications. These are more like machine learning, or I don't know if the right term is like traditional AI applications. Is that correct?
So I would say the platforms are Gen AI applications,
Yeah.
right? Because you're prompting the platform with questions based on the diagnosis you're putting in to understand what's actually the diagnosis and what might a treatment plan be. Um, so in that sense, I would say yes. But I think AI applications broadly it depends on the type of operation. In the call center operation, it was much more about large language models, right? There were all these procedures that were documented here, there, and everywhere. And so how do you integrate that into one data set? So when the calls come in, you can filter through the type of call to direct people to the right person,
Hmm.
or maybe it's just transactional and a bot has the conversation, answers some basic questions, right? What time do you open? What time do you close? What are your hours of operation? That type of thing. Um, it depends on the industry, but the coolest one that I've been working with is medical practice, right? Because
Right.
it's Gen AI. People can wrap their minds around that. Everybody's excited about ChatGPT as a practical application using the same technology with a different platform.
Right, right. Um, I kind of want to. There's the term, double clicking. I keep hearing that in all these, Silicon Valley podcasts. I'm gonna keep using it here. Double click on the call center case here. I'm pulling a blank here. There's a Gen AI tool out there that pretends to be a salesperson, right, or a customer service person, and please fill the name in if it doesn't come to me. But Air AI, I think it was one of the ones that I'd heard of. I've seen tutorials of this. I've seen supposed case studies of it. You're talking about something different in the call center client that you have, which to me seems like the bot that would be responding. I'm assuming it's like keyboard on the desktop. You go on the website and you'd be able to respond, or is it actually something that's responding with the voice? Okay, so how far away do you think are the, shall we say, like more elaborate or more sophisticated Gen AI solutions? For example, this Air AI that's able to actually essentially be a salesperson, although it's 100% AI.
So it's funny. I actually think the technology is already here.
Mm,
Where I think we're lagging behind is for consumer adoption and education and how to utilize these tools correctly, right? I mean, a simple example, I even go through this like at home, right? Where you put the wrong prompt in, you get the wrong response, right? And it's like, well, that's how it works.
yeah.
Are you educated enough as a consumer, as a user to understand what's the right trigger to elicit the quote unquote right answer that you want in response? Because
Mm,
I've seen demos. So in addition to the company you're referring to, there's a wide array out there, right?
yeah.
And I've seen demos which are very, polished and cleanly packaged, and it feels like a dialogue.
Mm,
But what it doesn't sort of cover is what happens if the questions go off script,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Or like in a very traditional phone tree, press one for this, press two for that. And I cough, and then that interprets that as press two. And now I've gone down the long left of the phone tree. That's where I think that's user training, right?
Mm,
That I think will take time as tools like this become more sort of embedded in kind of our day-to-day interaction.
interesting. So it's much more on the consumer side of things that needs to be improved, or I guess there just needs to be a more, should I say, like ubiquitous aspect of AI tools out there that we're interacting with all the time, so that we get better at interacting with them. We know how to interact with them better, just like a smartphone. And then the responses that we're getting and the tools that we're using are more applicable. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. And then I would add to that also, like the creating psychological safety in interacting with these tools,
Mm,
right? We used to work in automotive, and when autonomous vehicles became a hot topic a few years ago, and our companies is the technology available to deliver sort of a full level 5 automated experience? The answer is yes.
Mm,
It comes back to the same thing. It's consumer resistance that's preventing that from happening,
right.
right?
Right.
Because, companies that are developed AV automobiles have put millions of miles on their cars successfully, safely. But when one accident shows
Yeah.
up in the media, it totally dissuades people from wanting to adopt the technology, right? And so it's in addition to what you're saying, it's making consumers feel safe about having that interaction with AI that's going to be as good as, if not better, than interaction with a human being.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So you gave a couple examples here. So these are businesses that are adopting AI today. Do you think that there's going to be, I don't know how to frame this question exactly, but like whether the technology improves that enables other businesses to adopt the technology that aren't right now? Like, for instance, like a landscaping company, right, is probably going to use some type of SaaS program, but they're still going to require like human laborers all the time. Now, Atlas and some of these other robots that are out there now, once they get sufficiently uh, more advanced, then they can come in and actually help out the laborers. But so that's a very basic example. But with these other type of AI and Gen AI solutions, are there organizations right now or industries right now that aren't adopting it that most likely will once the technology evolves, or do you still think it's all on the user for them to get familiarized enough for them to start adopting?
No, I think we're at a very unique time in history because we're just at the beginning of this evolution, I would
Mm,
say,
mm,
right? And when you look back at human history and you see technological innovation, like the Industrial Revolution, for example, right? Is the one we're familiar with. Every industry and every sector is impacted in some way, right? I think right now it can be hard if you're not really looking forward to get your mind wrapped around that because it seems so foreign and so new, and it's hard to consider like going back even 25 years. I remember having a discussion with a friend of mine who had launched an internet startup, right? And talking to a friend of mine from college, and he thought the idea of buying clothes online was totally crazy. Like, no one will ever go for that, right? It's like, yeah, you as one consumer may be right, but it's not about like clothes. It's about like using a platform to consume anything, right? As a consumer. So in that regard, I think it's just a matter of time before AI technology sort of enables ease of use,
mhm,
right? And sort of
mm,
basically everything we kind of do day to day.
right. Okay, I want to ask you about AI agents, but I think we can leave that to the last bit of the podcast, which is typically about focusing on, the next 5 years or the future of whatever it is that we're talking about. Um, could we talk a little bit more about strategy? Like, say I'm a small or medium sized business owner. What are some things that I should be thinking about if I want to beat my competitor that, I play golf with every Sunday, and he's already implemented some AI. Like, should I be thinking about, well, I'll just ask you, what should I be thinking about to start off with?
Yeah. So we try to root businesses in understanding their core business strategy first and foremost,
Mhm, mhm.
right? If you have the wrong strategy, it doesn't matter what sort of tools you roll out there, you're not going to get the results you desire. So we really try to get them to think through, okay, this is your business strategy. Obviously, you put time and thought into this. You're allocating resources to support the growth of the strategy and development of the strategy. So let's make sure now that that is directly tied to your data strategy, meaning when you're coming up with these use cases for AI applications, they have to be embedded in your data strategy, right? Otherwise, what happens is you have all these cool, shiny toys that you're developing, and you built like a Frankenstein's monster type ecosystem because all of these applications are integrated, right? And as a standalone application, it may be really cool and fun to use, and the user experience might be phenomenal, but it's not actually delivering organizational value at a strategic level. So that's sort of the journey we take, right? It's pretty consistent. We try to align business strategy with data strategy. once a company understands the need for data strategy, because a lot of traditional companies, Mark, they don't even understand that part, right?
Sure.
Then we talk about that enabling an AI strategy, because we want to help companies develop these applications or find partners who have already developed these applications even better, I think, in my opinion, and do it in a systemic way that creates scalability for the organization, right? Because another thing we've seen, which personally I find terrifying, is companies that aren't data companies or AI, they're not technical, and they want to start building out their own applications because they think their use case is so specific. And I think that's a terrible allocation of resources, right? I think companies should stick to what they're good at what their core business is, and then allow that to enable the decisions they're making in terms of finding partners to ingest the right tech and then use that to create value for themselves.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of companies like reinventing the wheel because they get so excited about, building their own AI tool or program or whatever. Um, yeah, and the amount of costs connected to that must be absolutely substantial. Um, you were talking. I forgot the point here, but there was a point about. Oh, I'll have to get my guy to remove this. There was an interesting point, and I've forgotten it. Um, I mean, maybe I can shift it a little bit with misconceptions about AI. So I'm sure you're getting a couple CEOs coming to you and they think, okay, we want AI because we think it can do X, Y, and Z, right? Maybe they've seen some YouTube video or something like that and think, wow, it's phenomenal. It can do all these sorts of things, but it can really only do X, right? And Y and Z have yet to be developed. Or, as you said, their data strategy isn't implemented properly so that they can't do these other two things. How I guess the question is like, how do you deal with these misconceptions early on? Is it like a pretty direct conversation with these people, and then potentially well, I don't want to do any of this with AI then, or is it leading them on a little bit and making them understand the value of just getting X instead of Y and Z?
Yeah, I would say it's more the second one, right? We want to encourage people who have passion, right, for innovation,
Mhm.
but we also want to root it in like a realistic process to get there. And so if someone wants to, so crawl, walk, run, that's our general approach.
Okay.
And if they want to go straight to running, we'll try to explain the process to get there, right? And it's not that that's not feasible, but that might require additional resources beyond what you had in mind in terms of projects or work scope. So if you're willing to make that commitment, we can onboard the resources and get you there in a shorter time frame. The risk of doing that obviously is like you typically would want to make sure you're effective at crawling and then you're effective at walking and then you get into a full sprint. Um, Most leaders that we've interacted with are pretty hip to the idea that there's a process involved because in their own areas of expertise, whatever domain they've been successful in throughout their careers, they've gone through a similar evolution,
Sure.
right? Nobody's born a CEO. Everybody goes through some kind of career progression to pick up skills and experience, whether it's with people or with technical skills, to develop, kind of who they are and how they work. And I don't think this is any different than that.
Mhm.
And it just really it comes back to people, right? But that's kind of a theme in how I talk. I bottom line everything with people, right? It's really working with people to help them understand. They're asking really good questions, and the use cases are springing up totally make sense. Let's make sure that we have the resources in place to deliver what they're asking for. I speak a lot in analogies, and so
Mhm.
I'm surprised I haven't dropped one already. But it would be akin to like, you're going to a restaurant and you want to order something that they don't have the ingredients to prepare, right? It's like that's going to
Mhm.
be hard to eat a steak if you're going into like a vegetarian restaurant, right? So maybe you need to think differently about what you might want to order based on the supplies that they're able to prepare, or you might want to go to a different restaurant, translate that into a different use case for different application. But we try to have a very like common sense conversation to try to get people to understand what's possible and what resources you have to, have on available to enable those projects.
Right. And you already mentioned one of those resources being like the proper data strategy, and I know that you have quite a bit of experience in that. Could you elucidate that a little bit for companies that might be starting to think? Because I know that there are a couple business owners that listen to the podcast, and they might not realize how important data is um, for their organization in order to implement a proper AI strategy. Could you just like double click on that for us for a little bit?
Sure. So I had earlier in my career, I had pivoted from sort of data and analytics guy into more of an operations role,
Hmm.
but still being a data-driven operator because the data's coursing through my veins. And what we wanted to do was I had taken over one of the smaller, less successful product lines at my company.
Hmm.
And of course, the mandate was to grow. And so talking with one of my mentors, we were trying to sort out like what might be the best approach for us. And the question he asked me was, Zan, what sets you apart from other people in your industry? I was like, well, most people in this very traditional industry, like don't have the data background. He's like, bingo, that's where you go, right?
Hmm.
And so what we focused on was how do we leverage data to get better insight into the day-to-day operations, right? You have plenty of people with years of experience, and experiential data is valuable, right? I don't want to dismiss that either. But aligning experiential data with actual like numbers together to make more well-informed decisions.
Hmm.
Now we're kind of all on the same page, rowing in same speed, same direction. Now we can leverage additional technologies to grow the business. And so in this example, we started using machine learning for marketing.
Hmm.
So now we know who our customers are. We know why they're coming to see us. We know the frequency of their visits. Now we can look at a broader data set of similar people and figure out based on, again, this was an automotive business. So based on the cars they have, year, make, and model, what services they may require in the near future. And now we can communicate with them effectively around a marketing tactic. Like, Mark, we have different types of cars. So just spraying and praying with the $50 off offer, that might work. But
Hmm.
what might be more effective is based on your make and model of car. Here's a very particular offer which will help your specific car. And because you're the owner and driver, you understand what challenges your vehicle faces. And really, it was all data driven,
Hmm.
right? I just think in today's day and age, in particular, with AI being such a hot commodity, companies who have not yet pivoted into this space where they value data as an asset will be left behind,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 This is something, I mean, I've had a number of podcasts focused on AI, and this is definitely the clear message. It's kind of get on board this train, or yeah, you're gonna be eating a lot of dust over the next couple of years. Um, one point here that's I don't know if it's a pushback or if it's a point for clarification is, so if we're talking about this example of this automotive company starting to implement AI for advertising, and I think this goes to general points about AI adoption for companies. Did you experience any hesitancy, or I don't know the right word, like creepiness vibe for these car owners that would then get an ad that is specifically tailored to them? I'm assuming this is also maybe a little bit before we were all inundated with, campaigns that were purposely driven on or purposely built for like our profiles. Um, I'll leave it there. I have a follow-up question, but I'll ask that.
Yeah, so it's so funny you say that because like I've tried to explain to my kids that Google was not the first search engine, right? Of course, now it's so prevalent.
Yeah.
And when Google started, I was very reluctant to use it for that very reason because they had the best math, right? Their algorithms were the best.
Hmm.
And now it's so prevalent in kind of any application, right? Everyone's using the same process of aggregating data, building algorithms to target their specific audiences. So I think for me, by the time I was in that space, I was so used to it that
Hmm.
like the creepiness factor, I think was long gone.
Right. Right. Okay, well, maybe a question that goes towards like the future of things. Still think that there's a bit of a creepiness factor. I've heard that I've experienced it. I'm sure you've experienced it. I'm sure we've talked to people about this, where you talk with a friend about whatever, sofa. And then the next day you're, scrolling through Instagram and there's a couple ads about sofas. Now you've never looked for sofas, you've never Googled for sofas. This is the first time, right? And it's your friend that was talking about the sofa, not you, right? So I still think that is um high level of creepiness factors for most people. Do you see uh, like that obviously continuing, but then there's going to be like another thing that will be more hyper personalized to people that might uh ramp up the creepiness factor for companies?
So that is an awesome question. What I actually think, I know, like you said, we'll talk about agentic AI, and that's a hot
Yeah.
topic. What I actually think would be one of the leading trends for like the next year in AI is around data privacy and data protection, right? In the US, there's sort of no regulation. I should say that I am living in California, right? So we have CCPA, I guess, but it's not like Europe GDPR. At least it's continentally regulated for the European
Mm,
economic area. Um, that's where I think there will be a big push in the next kind of wave of AI applications.
mm.
Because even when we think our data is being anonymized, it's actually not too hard. There was a study, right, done where you could put, like, I think it's 13 pieces of information, and you can rebuild, you can identify someone basically who's
Sure.
quote unquote anonymized, right? So re-anonymizing anonymous people. That's where I think you're going to see more of an emphasis put, because the the opportunity that you're discussing for the creepiness factor to grow, I think it's exponentially there,
Sure.
right? Because now you're getting into like a really very granular level of knowing who I am, right? And it's like unwanted targeting,
Mm,
right? It's not
mm.
like I'm putting myself out there because I'm, on Google search, but I'm getting applications pushing things to me, like you said, because I was talking to you about a sofa. Um, that's where I actually think the next wave is going to happen in AI in terms of evolution and development. And the reason I believe that is because we've had, 20, 25 years to understand the evolution of data with social media.
Mhm.
And that was one of, in my opinion, the big blind spots in how social media evolved is what's happening with all the data,
Yeah.
right? It's not being privatized. And unfortunately, we've seen, dozens of use cases over time where social media data is being used not for good, we'll put it that way, right? And so I would like to think, and I'm an idealist by nature, so maybe this is my optimistic nature, speaking out, but I would like to think that some organizations that have large data sets and they're driving these large scale AI applications will take the lead, because I don't see the federal government stepping in.
Mm.
It's the industry is evolving too quickly for regulations to catch up, right? And for private companies to take the first step in sort of determining how do we get better at privatizing our data so we're not putting people at risk of being, creeped out by all these applications.
Right. So it'll almost be kind of like a free market solution that these companies are going to be creeping us out so much that we're going to maybe have so much pushback that they're going to want to be like, okay, put in some
Let's
privacy.
solve it.
Yeah, let's solve that. Yeah. Okay. Great. Great. Um, okay. Maybe a little follow-up question from there. Is there going to be, in your perspective, is there going to be a period before those kinds of self limitations are imposed where the creepiness factor is ramped up? Like, will the companies impose these limitations on themselves before the creepiness factor ramps up so much that people um, push back in such an extent that they're probably not going to buy, or they're going to what is it, blacklist, or completely stay away from certain companies?
I think we're in that period right now,
Yeah. Okay.
right? Where, I mean, especially in the market we're in, right? We live in a capitalist society and companies are trying to exploit their economic advantage based on the products they're developing. Right. So I think that's what we're going through right now. And we haven't necessarily like right now, when we see these misapplications of AI, they're almost humorous,
Mm.
right? Was it last year or end of 2023? Someone with Air Canada, right? They had a mishap with their chatbot and they were entitled to a refund. And then Air Canada said, no, you're not. And everybody was like, ha ha ha, because it didn't actually cause any material damage or harm to anyone, right?
Sure.
Um, I still think what I'm talking about is a ways off. It's more, I think these sort of topics, Mark, are discussed like in academia,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And not really put into practice in the corporate sphere quite yet, because I think businesses still see opportunity to develop their AI applications to make more money, quite frankly.
Sure. Sure. Well, I mean, speaking about making more money, what about these AI agents? There's constant talk about this agent revolution or AI agent revolution that we're about to. I mean, it's probably pretty much underway, but uh, as maybe as you said, the user base is certainly not consumed it as much. And I've heard many times that 2025 is the year of AI agents. I'll keep it as a very broad idea here, but what are your thoughts on the next year, the next 2 years when it comes to these bots that are going to be utilized by businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been maybe knowingly or unknowingly interacting with these bots for years as it is, right? They've been maybe not as sophisticated as what's coming down the pipeline, but this technology has been available for years, right?
Yeah.
To our earlier point. Um, I personally, I think it's good. Like, I'm an advocate for technology, right? I think it creates growth opportunities because now if I'm interacting with a bot to solve my transaction, the person who would have handled that, hopefully, they're being presented with an opportunity to create higher value interactions with their customers, right? I think that's good. Um, I think what's different now, though, is because the technology is evolving so rapidly, the risk is, and I should say, the technology is evolving so rapidly, and there's still a bit of a black box in terms of what the underlying data is that these bots have been trained on. I think there's going to be a lot of missteps before the process is sort of refined, right?
Mhm.
It's like with a lot of other products, you see this the same where everybody's races to get first to market, and then the product launches and everybody's excited, and then they have to pull back. Like, oops, that's not the outcome we were expecting, right? I can
Mhm.
see that happening a lot in 2025 before companies kind of refine the process. But yeah, I think agentic AI, I've heard a lot about it too. I think it's here. I think it's here to stay. For a lot of companies, it makes sense because you are automating basically commoditized tasks, right? And then what I would, again, ideally like to think is those companies are then reinvesting that money into training their people to create higher value interactions for their customers.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That I mean, that I think is always the goal, right? You reduce the boring, repetitive tasks that people are doing in an organization, train them up or uptrain them in order to do things that are more interesting for them as well, right? Not just more bringing more value to the organization, but they actually have a higher quality of life through the work that they're doing. That's always the hope. We'll see what happens with the hope. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, what I kind of want to go back and like, so you're saying that there's going to be a lot of these missteps with these AI agents. Do you have any kind of like tangible examples that you can think of? Like what I'm thinking of is, okay, you tell a bot to book a plane to Peru and it books it to, I don't know, the States or something like that instead. Are those the kind of things that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it will come down to like what's the application for the bot.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I mean, even in the past few years, as this technology has been delivered, there have been so many examples. Like the most recent one, like is the Air Canada one last year, right? That's one. Um, Microsoft when they rolled out kind of their first AI, right? And it was engaging in negative sentiment in terms of how it was communicating, right? Because that's what it was. That's what it was getting, fed in to its data.
Right.
Um, Ultimately, you still need humans to keep an eye on the data and how it's being trained. And it's like any system. What goes in is what's going to get spit out, right? So there's always risk of people, trying to, how would I say it? People trying to drive specific outcomes beyond what the bot is intended to deliver,
Hmm.
right? And so as that happens, that creates this maybe unplanned subjectivity and bias into the outcome of the bot. That's going to take time for the back end developers to understand like, okay, here's all the data coming in. Now we're getting all this noise, which is impacting the output. We need to come up with a better way to filter this noise out because people want to mess with our bots, right? I think that's just part of the learning process.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. So I guess there will be a lot more opportunities for bot data scientists or agent AI scientists over the next 6 months or a year or two. That's interesting too. Um, okay, maybe one of the final questions here. If we're taking a step back and we're looking forward over the next you know couple of years, it's impossible to say 3 years or 5 years now because things are moving too quickly. I used to say 5 years at the very beginning of this podcast, and that moved to three, and now it's just in the next couple of years. Um, you've already said that it's essential for businesses and individuals to start learning how AI functions and to use it and to adopt it. Apart from these AI agents, what would you say are kind of the biggest opportunities for businesses that haven't yet gotten into the space or made any kind of adoptions or implementations of these tools? Are there any kind of specific tools that you think are more beneficial than others, or is there, one real opportunity that's evading many companies? What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, I would say because Gen AI has become so pervasive, that might be the number one area to focus on because every company, whether they're aware of it or not, every company has their own data set,
Mm.
right? And people have questions like traditionally, but this is only a 20-year-old idea, right? So when I say traditionally, it sort of ages me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the company intranet, right, is typically thought of as a repository of data where you can get all of your questions answered.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the companies I've worked for, it's not really widely used. I would rather go talk to my friend Mark around the corner because I know he's going to know the answer to my question rather than hands on keyboard and figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a great application, right, for most companies is how do you consolidate the data behind all of your policies, right? For example, like I think HR, I think this is a fantastic use case for HR organizations is building the data set of all of your HR policies and now enabling a Gen AI tool to help people get visibility into what can I not do and not do in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think it's so common nowadays to be able to just want to ask a question and get the answer, but based on like we talked about earlier, the data behind the answer is going to dictate the outcome that you get. Well, HR policies at most companies are pretty cut and dried, right? And every company can control their own policies and change them, based on their own workforce. That seems like a very good use case to me.
Mm.
I could see that being really explosive, right? In the next short term, we'll say.
And probably a pretty, I mean, I don't want to say simple or easy, but in comparison to other things that companies can do, it's probably a pretty simple thing to implement and get started. For you're making me think. So in my own little business here that I started a year and a half ago, I was just talking to one of my team members. It's like, oh, like this is a mistake. What's the SOP that we have on this? Going back, oh, we don't have an SOP for this. Okay, well, let's make an SOP for this. And I know that one of my clients is also dealing with some of the similar problems, right? There's so many of these policies, procedures, and standard operating procedures that are kind of floating around the company. And if somebody at the beginning of the company created this and then they leave, even though that SOP is there, it might not be easily accessible for new people. And how much easier would it be to just have a conversation with a chat GPT like bot, and then furthermore, when these SOPs change, especially in a startup environment, you just tell the bot, hey, this SOP is changing this way and this way. Make those notes, and anybody else that has a question, it's there. You don't really have to go into, finding the Word document, making the edits, and then, telling people that that's happening. Yeah, I really, really like that use case. I think it's a great and simple one, and maybe more for me, it's a little bit more personable. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for me too. We have a client right now, same thing. They have all sorts of documents created over years, internally, externally, coming in from consultants, and they're all
Mhm.
here, there, and everywhere. So just trying to think of like, how can I simplify my own work for this client? Right? It's the same thing. It's like, well, the technology is available. You don't want to like I try to like step back. I try to focus on what is everybody's role and what's the focus of their role.
Mm,
Outside of HR, nobody's role is to work on HR policy and procedure,
right.
right? And so how do you enable, simplify that process? And so, yeah, I think I could see this being a very popular use case in the next year.
Yeah. One maybe final follow-up point on this. So we're talking about just like an AI bot, if you will, right? An AI ChatGPT, generative AI tool that people are interacting with. Um, for the HR team, they're going to have one. For sales, they're going to have another one. For whatever marketing, there's probably going to be another one. Um, or am I incorrect? And is there one future tech bot that you interact with, and it has all of the understanding of all of the different departments for, say, a larger business? I'm small. I'm only 10, 15 people, but for a larger organization that's 50 to 100, is it one bot per department, or is it one bot for the entire organization?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the needs of the organization,
Mm,
right? Because ultimately, so the under the hood technology, you're building these large language models,
hmm
right? And so effectively, that's turning into the database for the generative AI platforms. So it's about what can be managed internally,
mm,
right? Is the company small enough and are the rules consistent enough to create a simplified database that marketing, sales, finance, IT can all go ask the same prompts and get the same answers? That's going to impact your jobs the same
mm,
way.
mhm.
Or is the company so vast, right? You're talking about hundreds of thousands of employees, it's a global organization where now you have things like country-specific regulations, which is going to mandate how policy is applied. So you might have to build databases which are specific, or the LLMs might have to be specific, based on the geography. That's how I
Right.
would think about it.
Right. So do you think, and final question, do you think that in the some point in the near future, that even though the data and the complexity is so much, or so massive, essentially, the LLMs will be so much further advanced that one company will just have one internal bot, such as the plan was to have the intranet for several of these companies, that anybody can go to this internal bot, ask a question, and it has all of the data throughout the entire company, and you can just ask it kind of whenever? Or is that infeasible?
No, I think I certainly think that's possible.
Hmm.
Right? The probability of that happening in the near term, I think, is low because of all the data work required, right? And plus new data is being generated, it's a high volume every day.
Sure.
And you're ingesting that data, scrubbing it, cleaning it, validating it, and then, incorporating that into your model. But I don't think that's a preposterous notion. I mean, there are tools out there already in the market, right? Siri, Alexa, examples like that. You could judge the quality of, the responses you get back, but those are scraping kind of the global data set, if you like, right? Everything on the web. So I don't think that's an unlikely outcome at all. I think it's realistic to expect a company to have a bot that sort of, it's the brains of the organization, if you like.
Exactly, exactly. When you were speaking, I kind of envision, a future where each company has its own kind of, Iron Man Jarvis that they communicate to, and get a lot of the things done from there. Um, we'll have to wait and see. Very interesting. Well, Zan, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, for sharing your insights and, a little bit of your vision of what the future might turn into. Um, I'll have the link of your LinkedIn and your company up on the show notes. Are there any other places that you want people to follow you or reach out to you?
Yeah, no, LinkedIn is great. Visit our company site, Zeed Listens, Data Talk, zeedlistens.com, right?
Mhm.
Happy to talk to anyone anytime about data, AI, people, just to chop it up, talk about life in general. Yeah, but I think those are the best ways to get hold of me. So thanks for making that available.
Perfect. Well, thanks again. Appreciate your time, and looking forward to seeing what this future of this AI revolution turns us all into, and turns corporations into. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast.
If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.